Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Odyssey Recaps Below the Surface Edition. Today we are recapping Chapter 23, titled by Emily Wilson as The Olive Tree Bed. The chapter starts with Euryclea, the old nanny slave, climbing up the stairs to Penelope's bedroom to tell the queen that her husband has returned and slaughtered all the suitors. The poem says that Euryclea's weak old knees felt stronger now. With buoyant steps she went. Odysseus has returned and taken back control of his house, and almost instantly, the household, including its slaves, are being restored. It almost feels as though time itself has rewound back to before the war, a sentiment that is carried out throughout this chapter. Euryclea wakes Penelope from her god-induced sleep and tells her, "At long last, you have got your wish come true. Odysseus has come home." She tells Penelope that her husband is inside the house and that he has slaughtered all the suitors who are wasting his property and threatening his son. And she tells Penelope to come down and see for herself. But Penelope, clever and careful, doesn't believe her. She says that Euryclea must have been driven to madness by the gods, or else she's trying to mock Penelope for some reason. She asks why Euryclea woke her up when she had finally been sleeping soundly. She says, "I have not slept so soundly since my Odysseus marched off to see that cursed town." Now, this could just be because it was a god-induced sleep, but Athena has caused Penelope to go to sleep several times throughout the Odyssey, so what's different about this time? It could be another indication that Odysseus reclaiming his position as head of the household is somehow restoring it. Regardless, Penelope doesn't believe Euryclea and tells her to leave her alone, and says that if any other slave tries to come and tell her this nonsense, she will not be gentle with them like she is with Euryclea due to Euryclea's advanced age. But Euryclea doesn't give up. Instead, she tells Penelope that she's not mocking her. She's telling the truth. Odysseus has returned. In fact, he's been in the palace for a while, disguised as a visiting beggar. She tells her mistress that Telemachus knew all about it, but sensibly kept quiet to keep Odysseus' plan secret, specifically so that Odysseus could take revenge for all their violence and pride. Penelope finally feels the first kernel of hope that this news is true. She leaps up and hugs the nurse, but asks her if this news is true and it really is Odysseus, how could he possibly have defeated the army of suitors alone? Euryclea tells her that she doesn't know. She was locked up with the other slaves and could only hear the screams of the dying men. She tells her that eventually Telemachus came to fetch her. She says, "Then I saw Odysseus, surrounded by dead bodies. They lay on top of one another, sprawled across the solid floor. You would have been thrilled if you saw him, like a lion, drenched in blood and gore." But she goes on to reassure Penelope that they've cleaned up all the bodies, blood, and gore out of the palace, and Odysseus is now fumigating the palace to cleanse it and restore it to loveliness. Yet another example of Odysseus' return bringing restoration. Euryclea finishes by telling Penelope that she's been sent by Odysseus to fetch her, and tells her to come now, that both her and Odysseus can start to live in happiness at long last, after so much time apart and so much misery. But Penelope grows wary again, telling her not to start gloating yet. She says that they would all be delighted if Odysseus really did come home, but that it can't be real. That if the suitors are dead, it's because a god killed them out of anger for their abuse of power and their pride, and their blasphemy to the gods by treating visitors badly. She says, "Their foolishness has killed them." But sadly, it can't be as Euryclea says it is, because her husband, Odysseus, is dead, his body lost somewhere far from home. Euryclea chides her, telling Penelope that her heart has always been mistrustful, which arguably has been a valuable survival skill for Penelope in a house full of scheming men, not to mention the so-called fortune tellers and scammers who have come with claims that they can tell her the truth about Odysseus for a price. But Euryclea says that she has clear evidence that it is really Odysseus. She tells Penelope about how when she was washing the beggar's feet before the fire, she felt Odysseus' scar from the boar attack on his leg. She says she wanted to tell Penelope right then and there, but that Odysseus stopped her by grabbing her throat so that she didn't spoil his plans. Then she tells Penelope to come with her, that she swears in her own life that Odysseus really is home. She ends by saying, "If I'm lying, then kill me." Penelope still doesn't believe her, but agrees to go downstairs and just see what she finds. As they're walking downstairs, Penelope's emotions are caught between suspicion and hope. The poem reads, "Her heart could not decide if she should keep her distance as she was questioning her own dear husband, or go right up to him and kiss his face and hold his hand in hers. She decides to maintain suspicion, to test this man herself, to make sure it really is her husband, returned at long last. She enters the room and sits across from him. Odysseus doesn't meet her gaze. He's waiting to find out whether the woman who once shared his bed would speak to him. They sit in silence. Penelope is stunned. He looks like her husband, but he also looks unfamiliar. Telemachus is angry at her hesitation and begins to scold her, calling her cruel and heartless for rejecting his father. He asks why she won't greet him properly, and says no woman in the world would be so obstinate as not to embrace her husband after a 20-year absence. He says, "Your heart is always harder than a rock." Now, aside from the obvious disrespect, Telemachus has zero memories of his father. Penelope does, and she's being clever to make sure that this man really is who he says he is. They've been surrounded by enemies for the last 4 years. It makes sense that she's suspicious, that suddenly the danger is gone and this man is really her long-lost husband. The text seems to agree with Penelope in a way, because though several characters in this chapter scold her for her suspicion, the poem gives her epithets and descriptors like wary, thoughtful, wise, sensible, shrewd, loyal, and faithful. We also get a pretty good description of her internal state, where she's desperately hoping it really is Odysseus, but she's being careful. The contrast between what the characters tell her and what the poem tells us is really interesting. It's almost like it's saying that sometimes the wisest choice isn't always the easiest or most popular one. Something that has been an issue for Odysseus himself, for example, when he told his men not to eat the sun god's cattle, even when they were starving, or when he told them that they all had to go to the underworld on the advice of Circe, which they very much did not want to do. Then again, he's also made a lot of just bad decisions, so maybe he isn't the best example. But still, I do think it's an interesting point of comparison between him and Penelope, who, like Odysseus, is often described as clever, cunning, and at times deceitful. In response to Telemachus' outburst, Penelope tells him that she and Odysseus have ways to recognize each other through secret signs known only to us two. She's not taking his return on face value, and she's not letting her emotions get the best of her. She's going to test him the same way he was testing her in his disguise. Odysseus starts to smile and tells Telemachus to let her test him, that she'll soon realize it's him. He also says that he should probably change into his normal clothes because that might help her see that it really is him. But he says, all that can come later because right now they have a bigger problem. He says they need to make a plan for what to do about the suitors he murdered. And he does use the word murder. He says that if someone murders just one person, even one who is disliked in the community, the killer is still exiled, forced to run away and leave his homeland and family, achingly familiar to his own years spent adrift. He says it's so much worse for them, though, because they haven't just killed one man, but many. He says, "We have killed the mainstay of Ithaca, the island's best young men." He asks for suggestions about what to do. Now, keep in mind here that we've seen a few different examples of how revenge can set off a chain of violence that can echo down through generations, most notably in the Odyssey and the story of Agamemnon and the House of Atreus, which has come up a few times. Revenge is a family affair, and Telemachus and Odysseus' own acts of revenge may have just ignited a series of revenges against them in over 100 families. It's a serious problem, one that must be addressed immediately. Telemachus says he's sure that Odysseus will work it out, that he's said to have the finest mind in all the world, and that he'll support whatever his father decides to do, and that I will do my best to be as brave as I can. Odysseus comes up with a plan quickly, the first stage of which is to delay the discovery of the slaughter until they can go to a sacred holy grove and pray for advice from Zeus. He tells Telemachus and the two herdsmen to go and wash and change their clothes, and then he says the slave girls must also go and put on clean dresses. Then he says that the singer who was narrowly spared from murder himself must come and play a clear and cheerful dancing tune. And then the household slaves must be forced to dance. This way, any passersby will think that a wedding is taking place and not interfere or wonder where the suitors are. Everyone does as they are told, and the plan works. Passersby hear the noise, and they think that Penelope has finally given in and married one of the suitors, which, interestingly, they see as a character flaw, saying that she must have lacked the strength to wait it out and keep her husband's house safe till he came, which really puts into perspective the impossible situation that Penelope has been in. She was scolded for not giving in quickly and for letting the suitors just waste her husband's wealth, which is in turn wasting her son's wealth. But now that they think she's married, one of them, she lacks strength. But also, they say that her job is to keep her husband's house safe until he returns. But her trying to make sure that the person claiming to be her husband really is Odysseus is somehow yet another character flaw, this time her being too strong and distrustful. In an odd way, all of these conflicting opinions and condemnations only go to yet again show how fantastically and skillfully Penelope has been managing an impossible situation. Now that they've bought some time, Odysseus finally bathes and changes into his own clothes. Athena once again enhances his appearance, making him attractive, stronger, taller, and making his hair grow thick and curly as a hyacinth. When she's done, Odysseus looks like a god. Odysseus returns to sit opposite Penelope, and now he begins to scold her. He says, "The gods have given you the hardest heart," and says that no other wife would reject a husband who has suffered and been lost for 20 years. He tells Eurycleia to make him up a bed somewhere so he can rest, because Penelope must have an iron heart. Now, that specific phrasing of Penelope having an iron heart is interesting, because we've heard that exact term before, notably in chapter 4, when Telemachus was talking to Menelaus about Odysseus, and he said, "My father's courage could not save his life, even if he had a heart of iron." Courage and cruelty, bravery and stubbornness. An iron heart can mean many things. It's not always bad, and in reality, Telemachus was wrong. Odysseus' courage and stubborn perseverance played a large role in his ability to survive over the years. So I think this accusation from Odysseus is a bit layered. Penelope's stubbornness, courage, and iron heart allowed him to come home to a house and wife that are still his, just as much as his own courage and perseverance did. But back to the test, Penelope has one more test for her husband. Before he gets up to go to bed, she tells Eurycleia to pull their marriage bed into the hall outside their bedroom so he can sleep on that. The poem reads, "She spoke to test him, and Odysseus was furious." And then he goes on to angrily question his loyal wife. The juxtaposition of Odysseus' anger at her treatment of their marriage bed, which some scholars read as questioning her fidelity, against the use of the epithet loyal to describe her, is telling. Far from being disloyal, Penelope is using the very symbol of their marriage as a final way to be sure that she remains loyal to her true husband and doesn't let an imposter in their marriage bed. Now, what's the test, you ask? Well, Odysseus had built that bed with his own hands. He had built the bed and their bedroom around an olive tree that was growing in what was formerly a courtyard. He cut off the branches and sawed the tree down and sanded the tree down to be a living bedpost, one that was still rooted firmly in the ground, and it can't be moved without destroying the whole bed, something the real Odysseus would know. So a quick side note, in her introduction, Emily Wilson has a lot more to say about this bed and what it means on a deeper level and like various symbolism. But one thing that stands out is when she says that the bed that can only be moved by cutting down the trunk and destroying the structure is a metonymic symbol for the interdependence of the marriage and the house. The destruction of either means ruin for the other. So we can also read the bed as a symbol for the marriage itself. But regardless of symbolism and deeper meaning, the test works. And Odysseus angrily asks Penelope who moved his bed. If a slave can move it into the hall, it's not their real marriage bed. And he says now he doesn't know if someone, a man, has cut the olive trunk and moved my bed, or if it is still safe. And that is all the information Penelope needs. She runs to him, crying, and throws her arms around him, kissing his face, and tells him not to be angry at her, that she has spent years with a constant dread that some bad man would fool me with his lies. There are so many dishonest, clever men. And she's worried about the interference of the gods too. But now she knows the truth. She says, "Now you have told the story of our bed, the secret that no other mortal knows." She says that only her, Odysseus, and one male slave had known that specific detail. And she ends by saying, "You made my stubborn heart believe in you." At long last, Odysseus is truly home. The poem reads, "He held his love, his faithful wife, and wept," and goes on to beautifully compare the relief that they feel to have found each other again to drowning sailors crawling onto land. They have a lot to say to each other, and there really isn't time with the impending discovery of this slaughter by the townspeople, but Athena intervenes. She holds back the dawn, extending the night, allowing Odysseus and Penelope to reunite properly, to talk, to plan, to cry, and to love. And together, hopefully, to sleep somewhere along the way. Odysseus starts by telling Penelope that sadly, we have not come yet to the end of all our troubles. There are more to come, many hard labors which I must complete. He says they can talk about it later, but Penelope isn't having it. She says they'll have to face it eventually, and it's better that she knows what they must face now. Odysseus is impressed and tells her of his trip to the underworld, where the seer Tiresias told him that he must travel to a land where no one knows the sea and make sacrifices to Poseidon and return and do even more sacrifices. This is the only way to properly appease Poseidon and ensure that he can live a long and peaceful life and not die at sea. Penelope is supportive, and they talk long into the night, telling each other stories of what had happened to them in all their years apart. Penelope tells him about her suffering while she watched the hordes of suitors destroy their wealth and household. And Odysseus tells Penelope how much he hurt so many other people, and in turn, how much he had endured himself. While they talk and eventually sleep, the rest of the household winds down, and everyone eventually goes to bed, resting so they may be ready to face what is to come. When Athena has decided that Odysseus has rested and celebrated his return home with Penelope for long enough, she finally allows dawn to break on a new day, one filled with uncertainty. When he awakens, Odysseus tells Penelope that though they have both suffered from being apart, unfortunately, he has to go again. He tells her, "You must look after my property inside the house. Meanwhile, I have to go on raids to steal replacements for all the sheep those swaggering suitors killed, and get the other Greeks to give me more until I fill my folds." This is disturbingly similar to the exact scenario they have both just endured. Penelope will be alone again, looking after Odysseus' home and property, and Odysseus will go on raids to steal from others. But first, Odysseus says he must deal with the current situation. He says he will go see his grieving father first. Then he says, "At dawn, the news will spread that I've killed the suitors. Your orders, wife, though you are smart enough to need no orders, are go with your slaves upstairs. Sit quietly and do not talk to anyone." Penelope again is going to be locked away upstairs while her husband fights for the fate of their family. Odysseus arms himself and calls for Telemachus and the two herdsmen and tells them to arm themselves too. And then they leave, magically hidden from the townspeople by Athena, and they go to find Odysseus' father, Laertes. And that's where our penultimate chapter ends. Join us next time for book 24 and the end of our tale. Yes, we are at the end, guys. Chapter 24 is the last chapter. So join us to see how this story ends. I'll see you guys there.